Welcome back to the swamp, my friends, and welcome if you're new. Today we're going to be sharing some creepy and downright strange stories from the deep woods and cryptid encounters. As always, if you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to send it in at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going on a daily basis. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into these creepy and downright strange deep woods and cryptid encounter horror stories. Did I Summon a Skinwalker? By JFatman93. In November of 2023, my friend Dan and I began to get into a new hobby called disc golf. One day, we decided to head to a course in Battle Creek, Michigan, far from where we both reside. We were having fun playing with each other, laughing and joking around, and making fun of each other for being bad at the sport. We were and still are novices at the game. While walking the course, I approached what looked like an abandoned gazebo. It was covered and overgrown with vines, weeds, and other plant life. Part of the roof had collapsed, covered in graffiti and people's carvings of various designs. Dan, our other friend Ben, and I walked up to the structure and took a small break. We all studied the gazebo and remarked on how bad of shape it was. I believe it was me and someone else who said, "This is the sort of thing you'd see in those ghost and cryptid hunting shows." We all laughed, and then I did a rendition of the famous Ghost Adventure show intro, where I mockingly said we should return at night and see if we can find something. Dan then asked what we could find, when I quickly replied, "A goddamn skinwalker, boys," in a thick southern accent. We then continued our game of disc golf, and throughout the rest of the game we jokingly mentioned skinwalkers, like if one of us had lost our disc in the woods or anything, that we might run into one. This happened a lot for Ben, mainly because his disc was the same shade of green as the plant life around us, making it exceedingly difficult to find. Finally, we got to the last hole of the course, and when we approached it, we all noticed a significant claw mark on the stone base of the basket. 3 distinct claw marks, to be exact. Dan excitedly said, "Hey look, there's your skinwalker proof." We all laugh, and I say, "Man, as much as we've mentioned skinwalkers today, we're in trouble." As many of you know and are aware of, skinwalkers are attracted to those who openly mention them or believe in them. After our game of disc golf, Ben heads home and I follow Dan from my house to his. Dan and I hang out at his place for the rest of the day, playing Xbox, watching YouTube videos, and talking about our disc golf game that day, and doing other miscellaneous things. And yes, of course, the skinwalker jokes continue here as well. Well, around 1:30 a.m., I decided to head home and finally call it a day. We were both exhausted at this point. I should give the layout of the area. Dan's place is out in the middle of the BFE, the sticks if you will. On the right and behind his house are nothing but woods for miles and miles. To the left are fields, and across the street is a horse pasture with 6 or 7 horses. Anyway, Dan and I say goodbye to each other, and as I get about halfway from his door to my car, I am suddenly scared to death by this loud, distorted, high-pitched scream coming out from nowhere. At first, I thought it was one of the horses across the road, but I realized that wasn't the case. I know what a horse sounds like. That wasn't a horse. That was something attempting to impersonate a horse and maybe even a human scream. I returned to Dan's door, and when he answered, he looked scared. I asked him if he had heard the scream, and he said he had. After we both calmed down a bit, I finally went home. However, I noticed some strange things occurring around me over the next few days. I mostly saw dark figures in the corner of my vision. I heard my name being called and nobody calling out for me, and I heard what sounded like a whisper at random times of the night. I called Dan to ask if he was having these experiences, and he said, "Dude, I don't want to talk over the phone about it. Next time we hang out, I'll tell you what's up." 2 days later, I went over to Dan's place. After letting me in, he tells me, "After you left, later that night, and in the night since, I keep hearing whispers around my house, and shadows, and sometimes it even sounds like my doorknob is jiggling like somebody's trying to get in. He then told me that following day, he went to see if there was evidence of something being outside. There were no tracks, marks, or anything like that, and we've since laid way back on any attention from skinwalkers and anything like that. The strange activities have both died down a bit, but I have no idea what it was. What do all of you in the swamp think it was? A skinwalker? Something else? Please let me know. And Swamp Dweller, if you share my story, I've been a fan for a couple of years now. This is my first time sharing a story on YouTube. I hope everybody enjoys it. A Strange Creature by Avelonia. Hello, Swamp Dweller. This is the second time I've written in. I hope you read this, as I am curious to see if anyone has had something like this happen to them. I live in the back of the holler in West Virginia. This happened about 3 years ago. I woke up one morning and followed the usual routine, making my coffee and smoking my cigarette. I usually drink my coffee on the front porch, and today was no different. Walking out on the porch, I heard a low, deep growl off to my left. I froze. As I look over to my left, there stood a coyote. Only, it was wrong. It was twice the size of any average coyote around here, and its eyes glowed a strange yellow color. I had two choices. The first was to turn around and hightail it back into the house, but then I realized that if I ran, it would chase after me, and I was pretty sure it would catch me before I entered the house. My second choice was to continue walking onto the side porch and sit at the table. At this point, I couldn't tell you why, I decided on option number 2, so I continued. I heard another growl a few steps later, but simply ignored it and continued. When I sat down, I could see it off to the side of the house. It took a few steps toward the forest across the backyard and stopped to stare at me again. This continued for a few minutes before it got to the tree line. Suddenly, it stood up on 2 legs. It let out a yell across between a growl and a wail, and then it ran into the woods. This might not seem scary to many, but it scared the actual hell out of me. My grandfather said seeing a cryptid in the early morning light means they are getting bold and don't see us as a threat. And that is beyond scary to me. Made of Shadow by Abel Raspberry. This happened to me yesterday, and I'm still confused. My girlfriend and I were hanging out at around 2 a.m. when we decided to get food before she went home. Once we got our food, we ate in a church parking lot. I was getting a bit paranoid as we ate, feeling like we were being watched. I began to look around to see if anyone was around us, but I couldn't spot anyone. So I calmed down for just a minute and returned to talking to my girlfriend when I noticed some shadow behind her head, standing underneath the pavilion near us. I figured it was just some lighting thing, or maybe I was just not seeing it correctly. But the more I stared at it, the more out of place it seemed. I'll admit I was pretty scared, so I asked my girlfriend if we could leave. She said yes, and we ended up going fairly quickly after that. On the way home, I wondered if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then I looked over at my girlfriend, who had tears in her eyes. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "Did you see that shadow too?" It's safe to say I was pretty freaked out and began explaining to her that I wanted to leave because of the shadow. She then told me that she had noticed the shadow pretty much instantly once we started eating, but decided not to say anything because she thought it was her mind playing tricks on her too. We were both really freaked out and ended up going back to my house for a little while longer because she was so scared. Today though, we decided to go back to that same park at the same time to see if we were just freaking out about nothing or if something actually happened. And, of course, the area was just normal. She wondered if maybe what we saw was just a person standing there. But for some reason, I just don't think so. The shadow seemed inhuman. Kind of just like a dark mass more than a shape. I'm still pretty freaked out about it, and it won't leave my mind. I really wonder if we saw something paranormal, or maybe our minds were just playing tricks on us. I am utterly terrified at this very moment. I'm not home alone, but my brother is dead asleep and nothing can wake him up. Not even loud music. I will first explain what happened to me last night, and then I will begin with what's happening right now. I'm only 15. I'm an Australian, and I fear I have a Skinwalker stalking or taunting me. Now before I start, I know that Skinwalkers are supposed to only be in America, but I do not believe they are only there. I really do believe there is one here. Last night I went to bed normally, at 8 p.m., scared and terrified for absolutely no reason. I woke up 5 times from what I can remember. The first time I woke up after a happy dream, in a cold sweat, absolutely terrified, scared, and paralyzed. I fell asleep from fear, I'm pretty sure. The second time I don't really remember. I just remember waking up, still feeling absolutely terrified and in a sweat. The third time, I was terrified, still. I wanted to prove to myself that it was nothing, and I was just being an idiot. I sat up and I smelled like I had just run a marathon. I did not care. I got up looking for my dog Choppy. He is an English Mastiff. He must have sensed that I was terrified or something, because I couldn't find him where he usually was, on the couch. He was on my floor laying there, staring out my door, completely focused on something. This scared me even more, and I just went straight back to bed. I turned on my phone and realized it was around 3 in the morning. I turned it off and just rolled onto my side and looked at my door until I fell asleep. The previous 2 times I remember just doing the same thing, waking up and sitting up, with absolute dread and terror. I kept looking and making sure my dog was still there. I made him sleep on the bed with me the last time that I woke up. I told my mom, and she just shrugged off the whole thing as me being restless. She is a very skeptical person. I have never had sleeping problems. I have never ever in my life woken up with fear, terror, or even sweat. I will now explain what's happening right now. I live in Queensland. I'm not giving my exact location. My parents aren't home because my mom has to pick up my dad from the airport tonight as he works in Washington and gets to fly home every month. I am basically home alone. I don't even want to call out for my brother to see if I can wake him up. So I'm sitting there in silence, only listening to the taps of my fingers on the keyboard, trying to calm myself, and I am scared that even if I leave my seat to do anything, something will come through my back door after me. My parents are coming around maybe 2 a.m. tonight, and presently it's only around 8 p.m. I'm about to cry. My late evening has consisted of cleaning. I like cleaning as it helps me get my mind off of things. I was finishing up the dishes when I heard the dog whimper. It did not sound like any of my dogs, but I checked anyway. Maybe it was Chopper or one of the other 3. So I went to make sure that they were okay. Choppy was sleeping, and the other 3 were all asleep as well. I went outside to make sure there wasn't a dog or anything, and there was nothing there. This was really odd, but I thought nothing of it, and just tried to play it out as if they were dreaming or something. I do not think it was them. I could still feel eyes on me at this point. I could feel the dread, terror, and everything in me, but I am trying to show that I am calm and relaxed. I don't know if it is working. Something is out there. I can hear it walking, going through our trash. I heard it burp or something. It did not sound like anything I have ever heard. We do not have dingoes in this area, nor do we have any wild or stray dogs that I know of anyway. It keeps growling or trying to talk. Whatever it's doing, I am not complying with it. I'm going to stay planted in my seat. Plus, I do not think, with how I am trembling, I could even walk towards it. Yes, I am that scared. I keep glancing at my glass sliding door and my kitchen window every 5 seconds. I do not want to move. I'm literally shaking. I feel its eyes are on me now, and I can hear something is going through the trash. I have the back door open. I had it open so Choppy could enter and leave freely. He looks terrified. He went out there, and he was barking and growling at whatever it was. So were the other 3 dogs. He came in and the other dogs just went dead silent. He's sitting on the couch just looking out the kitchen window. We both give each other glances. Even if he is just a dog, we are both looking at each other as if though that we don't know what to do, or we're looking at each other like with a what the heck kind of look. I'm going to keep updating people, but
Before I post this, I'm just going to say, whatever it is, it stinks like rotten eggs, dead rotting animals, and rotten milk or yogurt all at the same time. It is horrid. I'm sorry if this is scrambled and out of place. I'm just so terrified, and hoping that your show can maybe spread some light on this. Before I start, I should mention that I am half white, half Mexican male, and this story happened to me when I was 17 years old. My family went to California for a summer vacation, and to see the family we have out there. That year, we decided to go camping in a certain park in Northern California for a few days, and being a Phoenix native, it was a much-needed break from the 120-degree heat. All was good for the first few days, until the second to last night there. A group of 5 to 6 of us were sitting by the campfire at 1 in the morning, when we noticed the forest goes dead silent around us. As we all look around at each other, questioningly, we hear the pained, blood-curdling scream of a woman saying, No, ring from the trees to the left of our camp. Not knowing what was wrong or what was going on, we kept our ears open and stayed on guard. A few moments later, we hear the same noise again, but somehow different. More inhuman this time. Like a voice being played off of a speaker. We instantly recognized it as the voice of the woman from before. Horrified, we quietly all went to our tents to hide. Eventually, we all fell into a very uneasy sleep. I jolted awake at 3 in the morning, desperately needing to pee. Thankfully, we were across from the outhouses, so after a quick sprint over into the outhouses and relieving myself, I hear what sounded like scratching on a tin metal roof. I immediately froze, remembering the inhuman howl from earlier that night, hoping they weren't related. Armed with only my phone, I watched the next half an hour tick down, either waiting for the sun to rise or for the sound of the scraping to stop. Suddenly, the light in the bathroom cut out. The timer for the lights had gone out, leaving me in the dark. With the faintest bit of light threatening to peek its head over from the horizon, I decided to make my break back to the tent. I made it across the dirt road to the camp when I heard it again. That woman's shriek, but not loud. It had the same intensity and inhuman artificialness, but it was like barely a whisper. Foolishly, I turned around and perched on the metal roof. I saw was a 7-foot, pale gray creature with 3-inch claws on all fours and deep sunken eyes staring at me a mere 25 feet away. Its flesh was tightly stretched across its bones. It was completely hairless and lacked any form of genitalia. I was frozen solid as we looked at each other until it took to its right and saw the light creeping up. It stared at me and let out one more agonizing cry that had me haunted till this very day. It sent one last soul-stabbing stare before it vanished into the early morning. As I lay back into my tent silently sobbing and trying to fall back asleep, I hear the faint echo of the thing's cry. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all that night and refused to set foot in those woods again. As we left the campsite that day, we saw a homeless-looking woman standing at the side of the road going down the mountain. I didn't make eye contact, but I knew she was staring at me. Once we passed, I casually looked over my shoulder to see if she was there, and she wasn't. But there was an owl who flew close to the ground to where she was. I'm going to tell you about a strange day I had while hunting just a few years ago. I'd like to preface this that I've only told one living person what I am about to tell you. This person is my longtime friend and, more importantly, hunting buddy. I am now 49 years old, happily married, and have a great son who is now 17. I have been hunting my entire life, since about the age of 7 or 8, when my father and my granddad would take me on my first real hunting trip. I almost always hunt with a partner, but sometimes with schedules and daily life, it's just not possible to have someone to go with. I am also a precision shooter for many years as well. I often compete here in my state, shooting at an item as small as a milk jug, at a distance of a mile, often in windy conditions, which I manage to hit every time. It's just a matter of how many rounds it takes. I have several rifles that I use for both hunting and competition. What I will concentrate on is the one I had with me that day. It is a rig that I use for long-range precision shooting and for hunting large game such as northern elk or moose. These animals can grow to be quite large and require a large round to adequately and humanely neutralize. The equipment type is more important because of the quality and meticulous way I maintain it. There is no question about its working condition. The rifle I had that day is an Accuracy International AXMC 338 Lapua Magnum. As far as rifles go, there really is no better out there. The glass scope I have mounted on it is just as important. It's a Schmidt & Bender LP2 5x25x56 with an MSR reticle. I also use a suppressor with this rifle, as the concussion wave that is created from the muzzle blast can be extremely loud, but decreasing the decibel level can allow me to get off a secondary if my shot is errant in any way. I was hunting in Teton, which is a place I have hunted several times before, both alone and with a partner. It is a wild and rugged place that requires you know what you are doing or you will quickly find yourself in serious trouble. This was one of those times I was referring to, when I was forced to head out by myself as my usual partner was busy with family matters and work. I was also not able to bring my son as I thought he was not ready for this kind of hunt. He was a fairly experienced hunter at the time, but was only around 12 at the time. My wife and I decided that this was a bit much for him. I arrived at my entry point early on Friday morning in late summer. The hike was around 4 to 6 hours through some pretty heavy brush to get to my favorite perch. So I geared up and headed out sometime around 9 a.m. The hike in was fairly uneventful, but pretty hot. That summer was really something else as far as the heat index. I arrived at my spot a little past 3:45 that afternoon, having made pretty quick work of the difficult hike. I will give you a real quick visual of what this beautiful spot looks like. I come into the edge of a small valley from the west. Where I sit is a small outcropping of flat granite flanked with trees and a few bushes. My spot sits roughly 50 feet above the small valley floor and directly across from a large granite wall about 350 feet high and maybe 80 to 100 feet at its widest point. Not too far from the base of this wall is a small creek that wanders right through the center of this valley. There are some small trees and bushes, but for a good portion of the wall, maybe 40 or 50 feet, there's absolutely nothing but some small ground shrubs and soil. So, from my hide, it is perfect spot to harvest a large animal with little if no impediments to deal with. The distance from my spot across the small valley to the wall itself is exactly 583 meters. It's a bit of a long shot, but with this rifle and the glass I have, it is a walk in the park. I have harvested several large elk here over the years, so I'm quite familiar with the shot. The creek and the trail leading up to it run right in front of this granite wall, offering me a usually perfect, broadside shot with a backstop to boot. I carry a small one-man lean-to under which I place my shooter pad, rifle, spotting scope, extra ammo, water, and homemade elk jerky that my wife makes me. Just in case all else fails, I was always taught to carry a secondary firearm for a number of reasons, but mostly for the ones I haven't thought of. This particular time I carried my Casull 4.54. These things would be all I would need even if something were to happen that kept me out for about 5 days. I got set up and took a short nap. When I woke, it was just about 6 p.m. The temperature had dropped and was around a comfortable 70 degrees. The sun was low in the sky, but at my back, which is another advantage of this great spot, I was enjoying some jerky and was thinking to myself that I might have to stay hunkered down till morning to get my shot. That's the moment things started to change. It started with the light wind dropping to just about nothing. I could hear the unmistakable crunch of large animal making its way down the narrow path toward the creek and the wall. I have to admit at first, I was so happy to get a shot that afternoon. I wasn't noticing one small detail, which is not like me. I hadn't noticed something that has only happened to me once before in all my years in the wild. Just as I saw a large male elk make its way into the wall area, the entire valley went completely silent. It was seemingly devoid of all natural sound. No wind, No leaves or branches falling or crunching. No small or large animals of any kind rustling about. Even the sound of the creek was missing. I was so focused on the animal that even though I knew things weren't right, I was still locked on my target. As I said, this area is pre-sighted and ranged, so I am usually worried about is the windage. As I was bearing down on my target, I noticed it. The animal was fairly close to the wall, but was angled at the wall, like it was looking at something on it. With a quick whistle, the animal would turn broadside and I would have my shot. Thinking it was most fortuitous that the wind had all but died, I clicked my safety off and took a deep breath. Then I let out slowly. Nearing the bottom of my breath, I let that light whistle and began to slowly pull the trigger. But as I got to the bottom of my breath, my target still hasn't moved. Not only has the elk not turned to broadside, but he hasn't moved at all. I adjusted the infinity setting on my glass and noticed the animal's muscles weren't even twitching. Then I saw something that to this day makes my skin tingle and shakes my belief system to its core. The wall. The granite wall wasn't right. The massive elk that seemed frozen in time. That's what he was looking at too. The only thing I could possibly link it to would be like driving through Death Valley on a summer morning. That mirage effect that you see in front of you. The wall looked like that. I checked my scope quickly, looking through my spotter scope. Same thing. Not having a clean shot on my target, I moved my crosshairs 1 millimeter to the left. I let out a breath and squeezed the trigger. Now, I was truly perplexed. Nothing. No impact on the wall and the elk still hasn't moved. Even though my rifle is suppressed, the decibel level was still very high and would be loud enough that animal would definitely hear it. And the impact of the supersonic CT round would surely have caused a massive animal to bolt. But nothing happened. Now, this whole episode from the time the animal came into the clearing to this moment was no more than maybe 60 seconds. But it just felt like it lasted forever. I quickly chambered another round, adjusted the infinity setting on my scope again, and just as I did this, I, for one moment, thought I saw something else. Something behind the mirage. To this day, I thought I saw a shape, a silhouette. I breathed and squeezed again. This time, impact on the wall. The elk jumped to life and bolted from the clearing. The mirage was gone. Sound and movement returned to the surrounding area. The wind started to lightly blow. I have never been afraid of the wilds in my entire life, but I was truly shaken now. I wasted very little time. I quickly rolled my shooter mat, packed my scope, ammo, water, and food, rolled my lean-to, and packed my rifle in my drag bag, and double-timed it out of there. I caught myself looking behind me numerous times on the long journey out of the mountains. It goes without saying that my hand was either near my sidearm or on it the entire hike back. There was even a couple of times I drew it from my holster while I rested briefly. The moon was near full, so most of the return hike was pretty well lit. I have to admit that I would have been far more freaked out if it had been a new moon. Plus, it made the hike feel much safer. I made the return trip, like I said, by moonlight and my mag light in an impressive 5.5 hours, which is extremely fast in the dark. I climbed in my truck and turned the key, and I've never been so happy to hear the growl of my Raptor. The clock read 12:14 a.m. as I reversed and turned for the hollow road. When I was sure I made it to the state highway, I called my wife and tell her I was on my way home. Then, I had suddenly started feeling ill. It's been about 5 years and I still haven't returned to that place. I have never since gone out alone either. I don't know what I saw that day for sure, but 2 years later I decided to tell my good friend what happened that day. When I finished, he was silent. I asked him, "You know I'm not crazy, right?" He simply replied, "I've known you for 35 years, and I have never known you to misrepresent anything. I have a new book, and I want you to read it cover to cover." The book was a book by a guy who studies missing people. After reading that one, I asked him if he had any more books. He gave me 4 more and I read them all. After reading these books, I'm not sure what it was I saw, but maybe it was a Bigfoot or some other cryptid creature. I wonder if any other hunter has ever glimpsed anything like what I saw that afternoon in the northern mountains.
Thanks for listening to these creepy and downright strange deep woods encrypted encounter horror stories. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to smash that like button as it helps us out a ton. The more likes this episode gets, the more YouTube promotes it, and that helps the swamp grow its ever-expanding waters. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new episode as I upload them multiple times a week. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to send it on in at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. I'd love to see what story was your favorite in the comments down below. If you made it all the way to the end, be sure to comment today's code word, jumping hot sauce, to confuse anybody who didn't make it to the end. The funniest comment using jumping hot sauce will be pinned at the top. Thanks as always, guys, and I'll see you soon with another creepy episode.